letting people in.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marie Keister, and I'm going to be your moderator tonight. We are going to wait a couple minutes, but welcome to the Hilltop 4 public meeting. We're talking about the Highland Harris meeting tonight, and we'll just wait for a few more people to join us, and then we'll get started right after 6 o'clock. While we're waiting to let a few more people in and start at 6 o'clock, if you've signed in and you have an address that says something like, oh, for example, Galaxy, if you would go ahead and go to your More button, I believe, or by your name, you can type in a more descriptive name. If you could just give us, you don't have to give us both your first and last name, but if you'd at least give us your first name, that would help us have a better feel for who you are. Well, good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Marie Keister. It is 6 o'clock, and I would like to welcome you to the Blueprint Columbus project meeting tonight for the Hilltop 4 area, which is really Highland and Harris. So that's the area we'll really focus on tonight. This is what we call a 60% design meeting. That means of a 100% design, we're 60% of the way there, and there's still time to shape those plans. So we're really delighted you could be here with us tonight. We still have a few people trickling in, and I expect that will continue for a little while. We'll wait one more minute and then we'll get started. And thank you, Rochelle. I see your name there. I appreciate that. And make sure, I may be mispronouncing that. It's either Rochelle or Rachel. All right, it's 6:01, so let's get rolling. Let's go to our next slide. And I want to explain to you a little bit more about who is on the call tonight with you. So first of all, I'm Marie Keister, and I am a member of the outreach team. Murphy Epson is a member of the Blueprint team. We're just really proud to work for the City of Columbus, Department of Public Utilities, and the great engineering team you're going to meet tonight. You are going to hear from Tiffany Kahn. She is the Community Relations Coordinator with the City of Columbus Public Utilities, I apologize. Jeremy Cawley, he is also with Public Utilities with the City of Columbus, and he is a Blueprint project manager. Then you're going to hear from Dan Baru and Joe Tribble. They are both with Corda Engineering, and between Jeremy, Dan, and Joe, they're going to get into the nitty-gritty, but Tiffany is going to give us a great overview. Before we get started, though, I would like to introduce Elena Shockey. She is Assistant Director of Department of Public Utilities at City of Columbus. Elena?
Thank you, Marie. Just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for coming, for participating in this 60% public meeting. Just as Marie said, there is still time for us to shape these plans. And when we created Blueprint Columbus and moved forward with our planning process, we really wanted to create a program that hears from the community and works with the community to shape solutions to our sanitary sewer overflows that you'll learn more about from our team this evening. So thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to log on with us this evening. to learn more about the Blueprint Columbus program and what's planned for your neighborhood. And with that, Tiffany, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about what folks will be hearing about tonight.
Thanks, Elena. I'm going to jump in for Tiffany because we're going to turn it over to her in just a minute. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the logistics tonight. So first of all, if you are interested in closed captioning, you have to hit that button yourself. We can't do that for you. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a live transcript option, and that's where you can click that button and choose show subtitle. Now, in the meantime, we are also recording this and it will be available online. Give us a day or two for that. Secondly, you'll see a chat box at the bottom. That's where, as we go through this evening, we encourage you to ask questions in the chat box. You are also going to have opportunities to raise your hand to have live questions as well, but we're going to be monitoring the chat box so that if something comes to your mind right away, you don't lose it and you could put it in there. Now, let me say that there are appointed times during the presentation tonight where we'll stop. So, and allow that pause for questions. I'll recap some of those questions and we'll get into the answers. So bear with me if during a chance when you put a question in, it's still a few minutes before we get to you, we will get to you. You'll also see the raise hand feature. So that's another button you can push. And when we get to the discussion portion, that's when I will be asking you to raise your hand so I can get to you to the extent possible in the order that you've raised your hand. So if you'll bear with us on that. And then of course, our discussion guidelines is not a hard task, I'm sure. We just ask that you be respectful and kind. So our next slide is going to show what we're going to cover tonight. Tiffany is going to give us a refresher course on what Blueprint 101 is all about and the focus of our discussion this evening, which is around green infrastructure. Jeremy is going to share lessons learned from the efforts they've made so far with Blueprint, that you get to benefit from those lessons. And then we'll go into very specifics on the neighborhood plans on your streets. And we'll show you big picture, but then we're really going to dive in close to, potentially a street where you live, and we will be answering your questions. And as we get to those, I'll have more instructions on what type of questions you might have for us. And then finally, we'll recap next steps. How do we get from 60% to 90% design, and then finally to construction? So with our next slide, I am going to turn it over to Tiffany Kahn.
Thanks, Marie. Again, my name is Tiffany Kahn. I work for the City of Columbus as a community relations coordinator. What that basically means is that I help coordinate the Blueprint outreach for this project, along with Elena that you heard give a welcome. What I want to do tonight is give you a background, a foundation of what is Blueprint, what is the project intending to fix, how are we going to do it, and then ways that it's interacting with you and how it can affect you as well. So first off, we're going to start with a little video. So Nick, if you can play that video for me. When it rains, water gets into aging and damaged pipes through cracks, leaky joints, and runoff from the roof. Most rainwater is getting into the system from residential areas, and the sanitary sewers were not built to carry lots of rainwater. So sometimes during heavy rain events, the sewers get too full, overflowing into rivers, like you just saw, or backing up into basements. One solution is to build bigger sanitary sewers, which treats the symptom of too much rainwater in the pipes. However, Blueprint Columbus is designed to solve the problem at its source, keeping rainwater out of the system in the first place and routing it through green infrastructure to create cleaner stormwater discharges. Next slide, Nick. So that's our problem. The issue is this rainwater is getting into our sanitary sewer and it's causing problems. It's causing issues. The sanitary sewer has two ways to go. It can go out and overflow into our rivers through the storm sewer system, or it can go back up into your basement with raw sewage coming up from the floor drain. Neither one of those is good at all. We don't want exposure to either one of those things. And so that is the root of this whole project, is to solve that problem that's happening right now. The EPA put us under a consent order to fix that issue in Columbus, and that is one of our goals. The other goal that we have comes from the normal rainwater rushing down the street, and it's picking up all the things that are on the street as well. So that could be dirt, oil, trash, anything that's there. It carries it away into the storm sewer and eventually makes it out into our rivers. So that also is polluting our rivers and streams. Next slide, Nick. What Blueprint is a different kind of solution, right? We're trying to be innovative and green, and we're interested in not only putting a Band-Aid over the problem, but fixing it at its source. So we want to fix our existing infrastructure, invest in what we already have, to create a better system, a better working system. We're using local crews, local materials, we use native plants. And all of this helps us to not only fix the issue of sanitary sewer overflows, but also to create opportunities to improve stormwater discharges. Like I said, our project wants to invest in local. So our crews, our design engineers, project managers, outreach team, they're all from around here. So we're wanting to add permanent local jobs, and some of those jobs are even the maintenance. So these rain gardens are permanent fixtures, so they will be permanently maintained, and those also are jobs that are created. As Elena had said, this project is a little different than other city projects. So most of the time the city's working underneath the ground or somewhere around you, then they cover it up and leave. But our project leaves something behind, and something that's in front of your eyes for forever. So that's why it's really important to us to engage with you as neighbors and community members at an early point in the project, so that we can talk to you about what are your concerns, questions, what are the things we don't know about your neighborhood that could help us and our design team to leave the best product in front of you as an amenity to your community. And of course, then this project also addresses the consent order requirements that the EPA put Columbus under. Next slide. Blueprint Columbus as a whole is a really long project. So it's a 30-year project in 21 different project areas. So if you can see up here at the top, Clintonville 1 is where we started. We broke ground in North Linden 1 last year, and then are almost ready to start Hilltop 1 and Miller Kelton. Hilltop 4, which is right here below Hilltop 1, is also pretty high up on that list of 21 project areas. And it's important to understand why we're doing this area early on in the process. The way that we choose these areas, they're very irregular looking, right? Nothing makes sense. It's not a square, a circle, or anything like that. But these project boundaries are important because all of the homes within those boundaries contribute to sanitary sewer overflows. And the priority of how we do these is because we're looking at where's the most exposure to these overflows? Where is it actually affecting people the most? And so we're looking at these sanitary sewer overflows and activations. Are they near parks, schools, tributaries? And so that Hilltop 4 being this high up on the list means that there were a high number of those near parks, schools, and tributaries. So that's why the order is as it is. You will also notice this big old blank space in the middle. So that means that area has a combined sewer system. Both the sanitary and rainwater come together and go out to the treatment plant to get clean before being released into, the outfall or storms of rivers and streams. The other areas that are different colors and are part of Blueprint are all separate sanitary and storm sewer systems. So that is also a characteristic of the neighborhoods we work in. Next slide, please. Blueprint is like a puzzle, right? We have 4 different pieces to our puzzle, and they all fit together to do and accomplish the goals that we mentioned. Lateral lining keeps the rainwater out of the sanitary sewer system. So we're using lateral lining to seal up and keep the rainwater out in the first place. Roof water redirection is moving the water away from your house, out towards the street, away from your foundation. Sump pumps do largely the same thing. We take that water that's around your home's foundation, pipe it up and out to the street. And then green infrastructure is what's put there to take on this water from roof water redirection and sump pumps, and as well as the rainwater rushing down the street, so that we can route it through the green infrastructure and clean it before it gets out to the storm sewer. And we'll go into these a little bit more right now. Next slide. The blueprint approach takes these pieces of the puzzle and fits them together in this way. So you see the picture on the left is a person that is lining a lateral through a manhole. The middle is a downspout redirection, and then the right is a sump pump. All 3 of these work to keep rainwater out of the sanitary sewers, whether by sealing up that pipe or moving the water away from where it could get into the sanitary pipe. Next slide. Lateral lining, again, is done through the manhole. It's very non-invasive. We send a balloon-like structure through the pipe, blow up the balloon, and on the outside of it, there's a substance called resin. And that resin sticks to the inside of the sanitary pipe. And when it hardens or cures in place, and we pull the balloon out, the pipe is like brand new. So it's really hard for roots to get in through that. And it seals up those holes and cracks where the rainwater was getting in before. Next slide. Roof water redirection is where we start to move the water away from our foundation and away from any places that could seep down into that sanitary lateral and get in. The top picture shows a downspout that splashes on a splash pad. And a lot of our homes, that's what happens, right? The water comes off the roof, down the downspout, and just sits there by the foundation. But that can cause problems because it can seep down into the basement through the walls. It could go into the foundation drain, or it could seep into the joint in your lateral underneath there. So what Blueprint wants to do is redirect that water away from the home at least 7 feet or all the way out to the street wherever possible, and get it out, hopefully directing it towards some green infrastructure to clean it before it goes out to the storm sewer. Next slide. Sump pumps work similarly. So a lot of our homes, again, are older, and the foundation drain is directly connected to the sanitary lateral, which is bad. So that means that rainwater is directly getting into the sanitary sewer system and adding to that overwhelm. What we do here is disconnect the foundation drain, connecting it to the sump pump, pumping the water up and out towards the street, again, like the roof water redirection, where we can tie it into green infrastructure where possible. Next slide. Green infrastructure itself is the piece of the puzzle that receives the water that we're moving, right? So we have the first picture here, just visually, we're seeing the rainwater rush down the street. It may be picking up leaves and debris. But now we're, instead of sending it straight to the storm sewer, we're going to send it through this green infrastructure, and it's going to act as nature's filtration device, leading to cleaner stormwater discharges that you can see on the right. So that's the goal of the green infrastructure. Next slide. And that's also our focus today. So we're going to talk about, at this point in the design process, we got a pretty good idea of where we'd like to put the green infrastructure and a pretty good idea of what it might look like. So we're going to show that to you and talk about the different tools in our tool belt. Left to right here, we have behind the curb rain gardens. So those are probably the ones that maybe if you've been driving around, you've seen a bunch of different kinds. The first one here on the left, they can have walls like this one. This one has 2 walls. The next one has no walls, so it's more of a natural looking landscape. The middle picture is a bump out rain garden. So when we can't use a behind the curb rain garden, we maybe have to use a bump out rain garden. Not the community's favorite, we know, but sometimes they're necessary, and so we do keep them in our tool belt, or our toolbox, I guess you could say. Regional rain gardens are a larger rain garden. So the city sometimes buys vacant land parcels or uses traffic islands or other green spaces that are empty, and we could put a rain garden there and we get a lot of bang for our buck. So we can get a lot of water through that rain garden and bother less people. So it's a rather beautiful garden to look at if you're walking through the community, and we're not really necessarily working in front of a bunch of people's homes for these. So these are well liked, and we like to use these a lot. Pervious pavement is on the right there. And that is a different kind of green infrastructure that works sort of the same, filtering the water, but constructed completely differently, right? And we'll talk about that in just a minute. That's a beautiful end result. It's very intense construction with that one though. Next slide, Nick. This is a cross section. So how does this rain garden thing work that we're putting in? Basically with layers. So all our green infrastructure is important that it has layers. And in a rain garden, the layer you see the most are the plants. And we're installing shrubs or grasses or flowers, a combination of those as the top layer, because those are the first things that are going to absorb that water and help trap the debris and things that are coming through the rain garden. These plants are special plants. Like I said, we use only native plants, non-invasive plants, but they also have to be very drought resistant and very flood resistant as well. So sometimes they're going to be underwater, sometimes they're going to be dry for weeks. So they have to be able to live through both. The next layer is mulch, and underneath the mulch is an engineered biossoil. And that's a mix of soil and sand that helps the water to drain down quickly. Our rain gardens are designed to drain in 48 hours or less. Most of them have been draining in less than 24 hours. So that's very quick. We don't have a lot of standing water in these rain gardens, and that's important as well. Underneath that soil is a couple different layers of different size stones. And in the very bottom, in the bottom layer of stone is a perforated underdrain. So it's a pipe that leads out directly to the storm sewer. And that's the most unique, thanks Nick, the most unique part of our rain gardens, as opposed to a rain garden you might install in your own yard, which you could, but it wouldn't have an underdrain and it wouldn't be connected directly to the storm sewer system. Next slide. Pervious pavement works similarly as far as having lots of layers to help clean the water. The top layer appears to be brick, right? It looks like brick, but it's not. So these are permeable concrete pavers, and they fit together in a certain way as to where there's little tiny chips in between them and allow space for water to drain down through. So then underneath are layers and layers of different size rocks and stone, and also an underdrain underneath that too. So the water goes through it, gets clean and out to the storm sewer, just like a rain garden would. And pervious pavement has its own certain benefits, right? It does filter and clean the water, reduces some street flooding and ponding just because the water has somewhere to go that's easy and accessible. It doesn't sit for a long time. And it calms the traffic, because although these aren't the German village bricks that jut up and are bumpy, these are nice smooth pavers. It looks like brick, so people tend to slow down before they get there anyways. And the maintenance on these is reduced as compared to a regular street. So we have regular things that we do. We have a truck that comes along and sweeps these, and then we also re-chip them every now and then to put those little rocks in between the spaces again. Nick, next slide. With all these tools in our toolbox, it's hard to decide, which ones are we going to use and where, but that's what our project manager and design teams are doing throughout this whole design process. They're looking at certain factors. So they're looking at where are the biggest problem areas and how much water do we need to control, especially after we've added in the redirection of the roof water and then putting more sump pumps out there for folks. And then also, where does the water already naturally flow? So we want to capture as much water as we can. So we put these things where we know the water is going anyways. They have to also address any barriers. So barriers could be huge trees or underground utility lines, other, sewer water pipes, things in the right of way. And then things also that, residents bring to light. So we have to take all of that into consideration where we place these. And also what would improve the neighborhood. So we want to leave behind something that is an amenity to the community. Not only does it meet our goals, but it also looks really nice and the community can enjoy it. And we have a priority for this reason. So we start up here in the top left box. We try to put those regionals in wherever possible. We'll look at a land bank, which is vacant land parcel that the city can buy, or a green space like a traffic island. And then we go to some of the right-of-way rain gardens that are between the sidewalk and the curb. Looking at those different kinds. The third priority would be the pavers, only because they're pretty expensive and they can't fit everywhere. So we have different regulations. The Department of Public Service only lets us put them on certain streets. So we have to follow those guidelines as well. And then bump outs. We've learned since Clintonville 1 and through that bump outs are not your favorite thing to see, but we do keep them in our toolbox, as they are important in some spots to be able to use them. We realize they do take a parking spot away or two, and that is a turn off for residents. So we do keep them, but we use them only when necessary. And go ahead, Nick, sorry. We also want to make sure that we say that we only install this green infrastructure in the city's right of way. We're not installing this on private property or in anyone's actual yard. It's only within the city's right of way or a land parcel that the city has bought. And they are all part of our storm sewer system forever. So the city is responsible for all maintenance. We do not expect residents to weed these gardens or prune the plants or anything like that. The maintenance team comes by once a month or more, right, if needed, but to do their checklist. And they have a checklist of checking the health of the plants. Did the plants survive? Are some missing? Do they need to switch them out? Are they not thriving in that rain garden for whatever reason? They do some mulching, remove any trash or debris that finds its way in there, checking the under drains and the overflow structures and removing if there's lots of sediment from some kind of heavy rain.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Eric, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Is that what, I'm sorry, I'm new on this Zoom thing, so I still have a lot to learn. Is that what they're doing up there on Sullivan Avenue? I noticed that they put Highland out where they have parking. Are they planning to do anything with that, or is that a different ball of wax, Tiffany?
I don't believe we've started anything on Sullivan. Jeremy, you can back me up, but we haven't started construction in this area, especially Hilltop 4, but not Hilltop 1 either.
Yeah, that's correct. We haven't started it. I'd have to check. I know Public Service has got some sidewalk projects and they kind of sometimes narrow up crosswalks with those. That could be what that project is.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Eric, I want to, we'll take another question from you, but then I'd like to be able to get into the detail of the maps and so forth. So you really have information about your specific area, but go ahead. What's your next question?
Oh, okay. Well, is there some way I can chime in when with a button or something like that when I want to speak? Or
yeah, in fact, there's a if you go to your name that's listed, can you see the participants?
Yes.
Up there, you have a chance to raise your hand. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to watch. In fact, Kiefer Schmidt has their hand up, and so I'm going to go to Kiefer here in just a second, unless you have a question before we move on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, the Schmidt family. I think there might be more than one of you. That's why I'm saying there might be two.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Kiefer.
Oh, hi. How are you guys doing?
Good. Glad to have you.
All right. Thank you. So my question was pretty much what I put in the chats, but so we had the guys come out and mark everywhere where they were going to put the raised garden beds. Well, on the area that they are coming up into our yard, we actually have a discharge French drain that we had Ohio Basement Authorities come out this year and do it. So how is that going to affect the raised garden bed, knowing that if they do that line, it will be in the way of our discharge pipe? And we also have a chain link fence. So I'm guessing as well, we will probably have to move that back up to the line, or how is this all going to work?
Okay, I'm going to call on one of our friends, either Jeremy or Corda.
I'm assuming, was it a sump pump discharge that they'd put in recently?
And what address is this again?
Yeah, what address?
It's 749 South Terrace Avenue.
For the sump pump discharge, we can just connect that directly into the rain garden. We've done that a lot with downspouts too. That way they're, it's not getting cut off from the street and it's still getting out and draining into the system.
Okay.
Fence, I would have to, I guess, look at the plans. I'll be that to Joe and Dan. I don't have the plans in front of me.
And if we when we went out there to survey, and if we spray painted, and if your fence line is currently within the limits of the spray painting, that means, and we did encounter a few fences that were within city right of way. So that's something that we'd have to address in terms of the limit of that rain garden, and we can go back to the drawing board. I'm giving Joe here a little bit of extra time installing, and hopefully he's pulled up that address at 749 Terrace. Joe?
I am looking for it now. I'm going to have to minimize our presentation here and actually take a look at the plans.
Yeah, but I think we've given you some of the answers here, and in the interest, we certainly will get back with every individual question, and you do have some specific questions there, and we'll get back with you, and maybe even we'll have enough time here as the meeting goes on, we can answer it at the back end of the meeting, and we can address additional details.
Already.
Thanks, Dan. I want to get to another question here, and then then we have another hand raised before we go on to some specifics here. So the question from G is, how deep will the rain garden be? They are in the Columbia Gas right-of-way. Will the required depth of those lines be maintained? They're going to be replacing some sidewalk. Is that a risk after a snow?
It depends on the type of rain garden, I guess, on how deep it'll be. It shouldn't be more than 12 inches. And that'd be from top of grade down. We don't want to have really deep features out there. That's one of the things I'll cover in a few slides. If Columbia Gas is currently there and they can't, if it's not, can't be behind our rain garden, they would have to relocate. That happens occasionally with these. We try to avoid them where we can, but sometimes gas mains are, in places we need to have a storm structure. So sometimes, Columbia would have to move their gas main ahead of us.
And to tack on with Jeremy, what is your address there, G? And if you could give us a first name that we can attach to it, and we can certainly give you a more detailed answer. I think just about every rain garden that we've designed so far is within right of way. And as Jeremy mentioned, if there happens to be a dedicated Columbia Gas easement behind the right of way, our grading limits does not extend into that Columbia Gas easement. But we can verify further if you give us your address. You can either drop it in the chat box or unmute yourself and let us know.
I'll tell you what, if you would, you could direct it to Dan. I've gotten a couple of addresses directed to me directly. So if you want to send that to Daniel Baru, that would be great, because I want to get to who I think is Rochelle or Rachel. You have your hand up. You're the Galaxy 520?
Yes, it's Rochelle.
Yes, great, Rochelle.
I just had a question. How did they pick on our street? I'm at 2188 West Mound Street. I'm the only one on this block between Clairton and Whitethorn that was marked for a rain garden, which takes up almost my entire front yard. So how did they pick my house out of this whole block? And I know that they said they'll be out once a month, but we already deal with a bus stop right in front of the house that I pick trash up daily. So this rain garden is just going to be a trash collection for the bus stop?
Rochelle, first of all, I know that we're going to get into some detail about how locations were selected, but this is really good feedback. And does anybody, Corda, Joe, or Dan, can you respond to how these locations were selected?
Yeah, Marie, I can talk specifically about that location. So what we have there is a known point of flooding at the on the northwest corner of the intersection of Clarendon and Mound. And a good degree of that flooding is coming from surface water that drains from the north side of Mound Street to Mound Street. And so in order to address that, we're looking at putting a rain garden as close to that location as possible. And in this particular situation, there's a large tree for the lot on the corner at 2194. And so that's why we chose to put the rain garden on the lot before 2194, which is 2188. I believe that's Rochelle's lot. In this particular case, there's a 48-inch sanitary sewer that runs under the sidewalk. So we were in a position where we needed to put this rain garden between the sidewalk and the right-of-way line. There's several feet of additional right-of-way in this location, and that's why we chose to put the rain garden in that location.
So Rochelle, hold your thoughts a little bit more because I want to get into some more detail, and we'll go through some maps, and then if we have time, we'll come back to your discussion, or we'll arrange to have a follow-up call with you directly. So let's go ahead to the next slide then. And Jeremy, take it from here.
Thank you, Marie and Tiffany. As I said, my name is Jeremy Colley. I'm the project manager overseeing this area of the blueprint process. And I'm kind of going to go through some lessons learned we've had from the previous projects we've done. We recently wrapped up pretty much all the work in Clintonville, and we're working in Linden as well. And as part of those projects, we've gotten a lot of feedback and a lot of other input from the residents on what they liked and didn't like. And so we've kind of changed some of our design standards or guidelines that we went. One of the things we're doing is we're trying to keep them smaller. We had several rain gardens in the first few that were very long, took up, some of them were 70, 80 feet long. We ended up doing retrofits on those, but as a result, we're now trying to keep them, down to around a 40-foot length or less. And we're trying to use no more than 60% of a house's or a property's frontage. When you get into some neighborhoods that are, have a little narrower lots, we don't want to take up, the whole thing. And we try when we can to split them between two lots so that it's not all on one person if we can. And then another thing we try to do in a lot of neighborhoods now, some don't have front driveways, they only have rear access, and people still park out front. So if a home doesn't currently have a driveway for access, we're going to leave at least a 20-foot width for parking in front of the home. One of the other new things that's not on here yet, we haven't finalized it, but in discussions with public service, it could be as wide as 23 feet. If the home has like a dedicated handicap spot, then the parking space would be a little longer. You can go to the next slide. Another item that was updated was the wall types and the depth or height of the basins. In the original 6 project areas, we could have an 18-inch wall. And most of those were done in concrete. Some were in this stacked rock, kind of like what you see to the right here. But a lot of folks didn't like it, or it was a lot of concrete to see. So we've actually shallowed that up when at all possible. Sometimes we may still have to go to 18 if there's an absolute reason for it, but it's supposed to be the not the way anymore. We're doing everything we can to keep them to 12 inches of concrete, or just 12 inches of reveal, just to lessen the amount of concrete that you would see. And another thing we're trying to do is, instead of having them be a 4-walled box, try to do a 1 or a 2 wall, where you might have a wall in the front and the back, but the sides are still graded grass, and it looks a little more natural and still lets the water get in, and it doesn't, just have like a box in a front yard. And another thing we're trying to do is, we try to maintain the 2 foot, like here you can see there's a grass strip in front. We try to maintain that 2 feet when we can, to not impact parking. And when we do those, we'll have this stacked rock look. It's a little more aesthetically pleasing. It looks real, but it's actually an engineered media. And but sometimes, just due to grades and depth, we can't keep the wall 2 feet back from the curb line. So sometimes it does have to be all the way up to the curb line. And when we do that, we have to use concrete, because the wall has to be structurally designed to handle the loading from the roadway. But when we do those type of walls, they will have a stamped concrete appearance on the inside. So we'll put form liners in there when we make those walls, so it'll still look like rock and not just be a smooth, flat concrete wall. Next slide. Other things we've learned, and some of this is from coordination with other departments. It used to be preferred that a street have rear alley access before we use pavers. It is now required. So unless a street has access, like a rear alley behind all the homes, we can't use or can't convert it over to a permeable paver street in the front. One thing that does come along with the pavers, and Joe and Dan might get into this a little bit later, when we do the pavers, because we're basically rebuilding the whole roadway, curb to curb, and sometimes sidewalk to sidewalk. The water mains, if they're currently in the roadway, we have been moving those out of the roadway for maintenance purposes and in most of these neighborhoods, water has plans within the next 15, 20 years that these mains are going to be replaced anyhow. So we work with them where at all possible on streets that have already been identified, to where we can kind of work together and kind of stay ahead of each other. And that way we're not having to drop back and make changes later after we've done the pavers. And then, like I said, we also try to replace the walks, where they'll be affected. If there's current driveway aprons, they'll be replaced, because the road, when you put the pavers in, the road that you have now kind of has a crown to it to send the water to the edges. When we put the pavers in, they go in almost flat, because we don't want the water to run away. We want it to go into the road. So when you do that, it sometimes changes the road edge elevations. And so you basically have to replace most of the aprons along the street as well. Next slide. So like I said, at this point, we're still at 60%. We still have time to make changes, and that's why we're here tonight. We want to get feedback, and we can make it, there's still plenty of time to make adjustments. In a few minutes, Dan and Joe are going to take over here, but I did want to go through a couple more things here on the next slide, just kind of give you an update on the schedule. So right now, we're saying we're at 60%, but you may not, to us, we know what that means, but most folks don't. So at this point, what we've done at like a 30% design stage, which was, back when we get some initial data, and then we look at the neighborhood and we look, at 30%, it's where can you put rain gardens basically anywhere in the neighborhood? Where can anything go? And that way we know all of the locations that, things that would or could potentially work. And then at the 60% stage, we've gone out, we've surveyed, we've got more information. We know where the water is going, where the problem issues are. And so we've picked the rain gardens or the features that will most likely be the best help to us to address the water issues and the future water that'll be sent to the street. So that's where we are at this point. We're kind of refining the design a little bit, but there's still, like I said, time to make changes. Right now, we're probably looking at having, the plans complete sometime towards the middle of next year. With, going to construction or advertising later in 2023. Next slide. And so this, we've been kind of saying you guys are Hilltop 4. This is the overall area that is Hilltop 4, the Highland Harris project. The northern boundary is Sullivan, and then you have Wiltshire to the west. Eakin, you kind of have a little piece that drops down there, but you have Eakin and then Whitethorn kind of to the east. And so this, homes inside of this blue boundary, those are the homes that will be impacted as part of this project.
So just a quick note before we turn it over to Dan, and that is that we're going to walk through map by map, improvement by improvement. So you're going to see some pictures, then you're going to see a map of where it goes, and you'll see some pictures and a map of where it goes. So we do expect you to have questions along the way, but then when we get to the end, we're going to do real close-ups of these maps. So bear with us, and Dan, take it from here.
Thank you, Marie. So thank you, Jeremy, as well. Having participated in many of these project types here over my 22 years working on city projects, a lot of the project types that Tiffany mentioned, gray, piped, out of sight, out of mind. It's nice to be part of a blueprint project such as this one that not only meets the project's goals, but it also prioritizes, local participation and beautifying the neighborhood. And so I want to start by thanking the city and thanking all of you for attending. So the Corda team, I'm the PM, the project manager for Corda Engineering, but the Corda team also includes some teaming partners, Brown and Caldwell, Hazen and Sawyer, Coldwater, DHDC. We've been working diligently with the city and of course the outreach team of professionals that you just met to ensure that we have a well thought out project to deliver these solutions while being sensitive to your input. So thanks for being here. So Joe and I are going to do a brief overview of some of the project background. Apologize, some of these items will be repeats of what you've heard from Tiffany and Jeremy, but a lot of these items are second nature to us because we've been dealing with them for 5 years, but I know you hearing them for the first time, it probably helps to repeat some of these items. So over the past few years, as Jeremy mentioned, we've surveyed the project area, evaluated existing utilities. You may have seen some of our team members walking in the neighborhood. We've walked just about every street, looked at every property, evaluated multiple design alternatives, during the preliminary design report, 30%, 60%. And believe it or not, we did have another public meeting during 30%. Unfortunately, not very well attended, but maybe the weather was too nice and it was in person. So I guess virtual is good for one thing. So we've done that. And over this project area that Jeremy have gone over, he shared the limits. This area encompasses approximately 350 acres. So it's one of the larger sizes and mainly residential with a few commercial, schools, places of worship, and scattered throughout. So within the designs that we went over, we do have 84 green infrastructure improvements on the site, of which 74 are right-of-way rain gardens, a bump out, 7 regional rain gardens on the land bank properties, and 2 pervious paver streets, which you've heard about. And all of these are, I know there was a question about how we chose these locations. There's strategy involved in making sure that we place them where it helps to meet the blueprint project goals. So we'll discuss various of these types, and I want to hand it off to Joe now to dive a little bit deeper into the description of some of these green infrastructures. Joe?
Thank you, Dan, and good evening, everyone. As Dan said, my name is Joe Tribble. I'm the Deputy Project Manager on this project, so I'm involved in the day-to-day work, and I'm certainly excited for the opportunity to share the result of that work with everyone here tonight. The first thing I'd like to do is talk about some renderings that our team has prepared for several of the different types of green infrastructure. These are not necessarily exact replicas of the finished product, but they are specific to our project area, and they should provide a good idea of our concepts and design considerations. I'm then going to follow up with a closer look at where these different types of green infrastructure are located within the project area. So let's start with our renderings of right-of-way rain gardens. There are 4 of them. I believe that Tiffany went through earlier. I'm then going to hand it back off to Dan to talk about renderings of our regional rain gardens and our pervious paver streets. The slide that you see here now, the first rendering is what we call our sloped right-of-way rain garden. This particular example is located at 995 Harris Avenue. It's the most basic of our right-of-way rain gardens. These are placed along streets with no curb. The rainwater simply drains along the road, across the grass berm, and into the rain garden where it's detained to dampen flooding and then treated to improve water quality. In this particular example, we have 2 walls between the rain garden and the house. This helps with grade transition. Several of our other sloped right-of-way rain gardens also have 2 walls. Some of them only have 1 wall, and some don't have any walls at all. It really depends on the severity of the grade. Go to the next slide, Nick. So this next slide, this next rendering is a rendering of our standard 2-walled right-of-way rain garden along a curbed street. This particular example is at 759 Hague Avenue. We typically place these along curb streets between the curb and the sidewalk, and these have the stamped concrete walls that Jeremy mentioned earlier. It's not always possible, but we try to design so that we use these in areas where parking is already prohibited so that we minimize parking loss. And if you look very closely at this example, you can see there's a no parking sign just to the left of the rain garden in the photo and the rendering. And in all cases, our walled rain gardens along curbed streets, we will be replacing the adjacent curb and sidewalk to a point at least 5 feet beyond the rain garden in each direction. Next slide, please. So our third rendering is of a 2-walled right-of-way rain garden with a step out. These are similar to the ones Tiffany and Jeremy talked about earlier. This particular example is at 1037 Hague Avenue. Once again, these are placed along curb streets between the curb and the sidewalk, and these have the stacked rock look that Jeremy discussed earlier. These rain gardens are offset 2 feet behind the curb to allow a driver or passenger to step out of their vehicle onto the grass berm. It's not always possible, once again, but our design approach is to use these step-out rain gardens in areas with dedicated parking to avoid losing parking places. Next slide, please. Our next example is the bump out rain garden. It's our final example of right-of-way rain gardens. We don't have a rendering of this, but this is a photo from another project, and it's very similar to the one we're proposing here. We place these along curb streets. The bump outs actually project out into the street the same width as a parked car. We use these in areas where there's limited space, where we need a rain garden, but there's limited space between the curb and the property line. You can see that the bump outs do have raised reflectors for visibility, and we only have one of these in our project area. It's located at 2187 Amherst Avenue. Next slide, Nick. So this slide shows the location of all 75 right-of-way rain gardens within our project area. If you look closely, you can see them with the light represented by the light green ovals. It does include the one bump out rain garden that we just talked about along Amherst. In total, it also includes 15 of the sloped rain gardens along non-curb streets, 15 of the 2-walled rain gardens with step outs on streets with dedicated parking, and then 44 of the standard 2-walled rain gardens sprinkled throughout the project area. We've got these mainly on Eakin Road, Hague Avenue north of Eakin, and along Mound Street and intersections with Mound where parking is already prohibited. A little bit later, we're going to take a closer look at some zoomed in maps to see in more detail where these right-of-way rain gardens are located in the project area. But first, I'm going to hand it back to Dan to discuss our final 2 renderings and our parking study.
Thank you, Joe. What you see here is a rendering of a regional rain garden. This is the type that's placed on a vacant land bank property, and it is outside of right-of-way. These offer a larger footprint than the right-of-way rain gardens that Joe just described, providing more storage and added capability for treating stormwater. Of course, aesthetically pleasing. I think someone mentioned that previously, as are all green infrastructure, in my opinion, but these ones are even more so. So we always look for opportunities to use these regional rain gardens on land bank properties when it fits the need, because you get larger bang for your buck. You know, you get more treatment and more effective. This rendering in particular is at 2425 Mound Street. It's the southeast corner of Mound Street and Wayne Avenue, close to Hilltonia Middle School in the park there. As with slope rain gardens, these regional rain gardens may have 1 or 2 walls to help with grade transition. This one in particular did not require it. Next slide, please. So as we build onto this map, you still have the green location showing the right-of-way rain gardens, and then you've got the blue showing the regional rain gardens that we just discussed. And you know, the 7 regional rain gardens are mainly concentrated at the east or northeast part of the project area, and with the largest one at the northeast corner of Oakley and Safford. And Joe will get to more zoomed in detailed maps where you can see those relative to your street or your property. Next slide. The final rendering is a pervious paver street. And again, I know we've discussed this a couple of times here. I won't get into too much details. This one here is just north of Mound on Eureka. We have 2 of these instances on our project site. Again, as with the regional land bank property rain gardens, these offer larger footprint than the right-of-way rain gardens, which means more storage, more treatment of stormwater, more effective solution to provide the blueprint solution. And I think Tiffany mentioned during the overview, these require a more impactful construction because again, we're replacing full depth of the street and adding subsurface storage zones and under drain. And Jeremy mentioned about water line and sidewalk replacement. But one thing we prioritized when we selected pervious paver streets, or a couple things. One is we looked for streets with minimal trees. As you can see there on Eureka there, the before photo, minimal trees. And of course, we come back in and add trees in the lawn area between the sidewalk and the street. But we also try to, not only does that avoid damage to very valuable trees, you know, the trees are valuable in these corridors, but it also, tree debris contributes to clogging and long-term maintenance issues of the paver street. So we try to avoid streets with large, mature specimen trees. But we also prioritize shorter length of streets with alleys behind the residential property. So it allows for reduced impact on residential parking during this, you know, impactful construction. So if you can go to the last overview map, this shows the 2 gray shaded light gray areas show the 2 locations on Richardson Avenue and Eureka where we are adding paver streets. And last map, before I pass it back to Joe, and we pause for more questions, is I want to touch on a parking study efforts on the project. Because we're not always able to place these step-out rain gardens on streets with dedicated parking, because of limited space and existing utilities, we do have some parking loss in a few locations. Now, I assure you, we made every attempt to minimize these losses and to spread out these minimal losses throughout the overall project area. But and so on each street where there was some parking loss, we conducted parking studies based on the city's blueprint parking guidelines. And these guidelines require that, among other things, that we do these parking counts to confirm that we're not creating a parking shortage in any particular location. So the counts are done 3 times each day, once during the week and once on a weekend. And this slide, this map shows the streets where we have parking losses and conducted the study. The green are streets with high available parking, which means the least amount of losses, and the yellow are streets with medium available parking. And the black is where parking was unaffected. And the results show that we're well within Columbus blueprint parking criteria, and reflects that no significant impacts to overall parking usage on any impacted street. So I think we're going to pause here for questions, Marie, unless you want to get through the detailed maps and then pause for questions.
Since I don't see any questions yet, let's just dive into those really detailed ones. And then I think that might prompt some questions once people can really see where things are happening.
Very good. I think it's Joe, you're up, right?
Yes, Joe.
I do believe I am. Yes, thank you. So as promised, we're going to take a deeper dive into and a closer look at the different locations at which we have green infrastructure within the project. We're going to start at the southwest corner of the project. Then we're going to take a closer look at the west side, and we're going to finally wrap it up with a closer look at the east side. Next slide, please, Nick. So this is the southwest corner of our project, which we lovingly call the Panhandle. It is generally bounded by Wiltshire Road on the west, Eakin Road on the north, Harris Avenue on the east, and the Crossroads United Methodist Church on the south. There are 15 rain gardens located in this area, no regionals, and no pervious pavers. So out of those 15 rain gardens, we have 2 of the sloped rain gardens. Both of those are located on the south side of Rosedale Avenue. We have 3 standard 2-wall rain gardens. Those are located on the west side of Harris Avenue, and the rest are 2-walled rain gardens with step outs, and I believe there are 10 of those. The land in this area slopes generally from west to east. Therefore, you'll see that most of the rain gardens are located on the west side of the streets. We do have some parking loss associated with the 3 standard 2-wall rain gardens on Harris between Rosedale and Vanderburg Avenue. We started the project wanting to use the rain gardens with step outs in those locations, but we were unable to do so due to a conflict with the existing utilities and a limited space between the curb and the property line along that side of Harris in that location. We did conduct the parking study there, and we found that there was no significant impact to overall parking usage in that area.
Joe, let me stop you there a minute. Oh, there we go. We have a hand raised. Let me track you down there.
Eric Kimbrough. I'm learning.
Good job.
I would be very interested. I'm kind of excited about that rain garden thing in front of my house. I'd like to have one of your representatives come by and we can chat about that. Maybe perhaps my house I live at 778, and maybe perhaps my house could showcase for this block. Of course, I would be interested in seeing pavers in this section. Also, at the corner of Whitethorn and South Eureka, on the northeast corner, it is now bare. Were you guys thinking, I know the city has a sign up there. On the parking thing, I think that would be nice to have a neighborhood parking lot right there, paved, of course, with lights and a camera. That would alleviate some of the that would definitely alleviate some of the parking problems around here. But because I want to, because I have a little bit radical idea for my property, I'd rather not bring it, bring it right to reform just yet. Okay. So if you can get somebody to come by here, I'd be willing to talk. Let's talk.
Eric, we so appreciate that. That's a wonderful offer, and we will take you up on that. And
We have his address, Marie. He said 778. Do we have the
South
street?
Eureka.
Eureka, I'm sorry.
yeah, so I think, and Eric, I think you already sent me your address, but if you would just do it again, just so we have it in writing and we can follow up with you directly. You could direct message either Dan Baru or Joe Tribble at Corda with your name and address, and they'll follow up, and your phone number. That would be a great help.
Florida, where, okay, do I do, I've got the Blueprint Columbus thing. Can I, is the information there so I can send it to you?
Oh, fabulous. Yes, there should be contact information on there.
Lovely. So I can email you at blueprintcolumbus.gov.
Beautifully said. Yes.
All right. Lovely.
Okay, that's awesome. Does anybody else who lives right in this area have any comments or questions before Joe moves on to the next area? Sure. Okay, Joe, I think we can move on.
Okay, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Marie. I believe, yes, we're on the correct side. So next we're going to take a closer look at the west side of the project area. This is typically bounded, not typically, but generally bounded by Wiltshire Avenue on the west, Sullivan Avenue on the north, Terrace Avenue on the east, and Eakin Road on the south. We have 24 rain gardens in this area. 3 of them are the sloped rain gardens, and they're on the non-curbed portions of Whitehead Road. 20 of them are standard 2-walled rain gardens. Those are mostly on Hague Avenue north of Mound, and we have several more of those at the intersections of Sullivan, Whitehead, Mound, and Eakin, where there's prohibited parking. We do have 1 2-walled rain garden with a step out, and that's located on Harris Avenue, on the west side of Harris Avenue, just north of Mound Street. If you want to point at that one next.
Yeah. So anybody on the call live in that particular area that you have any specific questions? There we go. Now I got to track you down. Bear with me. Go ahead and ask your question. There you go. Marston. Marston Bender, can you want to weigh in with a question? Okay, Marston, I'm going to give you one more chance. Anything you'd like to say or ask about? I'll tell you what, if we keep moving on and we miss you, just send a note in the chat. Eric, you have another question. Let's see, Eric may be having a hard time unmuting. Eric, can you hit the unmute button on your end?
Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was thinking about I was kind of looking at the property there, right there at Hilltonia. As you well know, you have a very large area there. But what about a rain garden in a small lake right south of Mound Street, right there, like a grove of trees? Now, I think looking at the land relief, I think probably, if I'm not correct, there's a sewer line that runs, which contains the early run. And I think it runs from Whitehead Road to right into on the other side of Eakin. Am I not correct, guys?
You are correct, Eric.
All right. Is there a possibility that you could have a section of open drain there with a graded area for like walkways? And actually that would be quite beautiful, to tell you the God's honest truth, and have the early run through there. Okay, and then have rain gardens on the other side. There's another thing I wanted to talk to you about. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take take up all the time. Sean, you want to talk to chime in?
Well, we'll go to Sean and then we're going to try Marston again.
All right, all right. Let me gather my thoughts again, okay?
Okay.
And
Sean,
to answer to Eric's question, Marie, we did consider a number of large regional detention basins there on Hiltonia Park property, but Rec and Parks has plans, more active areas for various activities for the neighborhood, and any rain gardens or stormwater features we found out early through Rec and Parks would somewhat interfere with their plans for those areas. So that was quickly out of the window there early on. But good ideas there, Eric. It sounds like you've got a good head on your shoulder in regards to engineering. So if you're looking for a job, let us know.
all right. So Sean, let's hear from you. What question or comment do you have?
Yes, hi. I may have missed it, but what are the bluish gray and white pattern? Is that supposed to reflect something on this map running north and south on Terrace? And yes, over there as well. I don't know what street that is.
Yeah, what those are just the boundaries between the different areas that we're talking about. Just to give you the opportunity to kind of frame in your mind where we're focusing our comments with our deeper dive into the individual areas. So right now we're looking at the west side of the project that's north of that first panhandle area that we talked about south of Eakin, and it's west of Terrace Avenue. They represent nothing more than a paper boundary of the areas that we're looking at.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Was that
Good
it,
question.
Sean, or did you have something else?
Hello?
Not right now at this time. Thank you.
Marston, I think I hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, okay, very
Yeah.
good. Sorry
Yeah.
about that. I was having some technical difficulties.
No
Yes, so I live at 640 South Ogden Avenue. It's right across the street on the east side of the proposed rain garden there on like the upper part of Ogden Avenue. And the question I had was, so the street in front of my house, there seems to perpetually be a puddle there that does not drain properly, and so much so that the downspout runoff that I have from my house like empties in there, and it drains so little that when it rains quite heavily like it did last week, I'll get backups from my downspout. So I was wondering if the proposed location is selected like across the street from me, like would there be some way to direct the flow from that standing water that's currently in front of my house across the street to that location, or would something else have to be done as well?
Well, we'll have to take a closer look at that. I do know that just south, I believe you're talking about the rain garden that's a little bit north on Ogden.
Yes.
A little bit north of Whitehead on Ogden on the west left or the west side of Ogden Avenue. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And you're across the street from that, right?
Yes.
Okay. I do know that just south of that rain garden is a curb inlet, and that's one of our flooding areas.
Mhm.
And so as part of this project, we are putting in the rain garden in that location to help dampen the flooding at that particular curb inlet. Is there a curb inlet on your side as well?
There is, but it's further down the street, further enough that like right now there's standing water outside my house and it's not quite enough to get to that curb. So I don't know if like some additional road sculpting would be necessary or what.
Okay. Is it further south towards Whitehead?
Yes, the drain inlet.
Yeah, I'm looking
Yes.
at the map now, Joe. This is on sheet 36 of your plans. There's a curb inlet on his side of the street, which is 2 houses away from his address at 640.
Mhm.
This is something we can look at closer, and if you're having standing water on the street, which is what 2 days after a rain event,
Mhm.
it's something that we can look at. Now there is storm sewer infrastructure nearby, so we'll have to assess and see if it's maybe if there's some issue with that curb inlet, but it's certainly something worth looking at, and we will.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Great input, Marston. Okay, Eric, I'm going to give you another chance to weigh in before we go to the next map. And Eric, you'll have to unmute yourself.
I'm working on it.
Oh, there you go. You got it.
When you come by, when the representative comes by, can you have kind of like a portfolio of the rain gardens, the different type of rain gardens that you plan to install in various places? And my last question is, actually it's a kind of a statement. I take it by this being a part of the old Camp Chase tract. Was this land built, were these houses built on swamp land or kind of like a marshy area? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think
we can hear
somebody's
you.
processing. Dan, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, it's tough to say. Inherently, the project area in terms of flooding issues and concerns, I mean, we're assessing to make sure that what we do doesn't minimize, of course, any flooding, but we're not sure of the details in terms of the structures, but we can certainly look into it. We will have some geotechnical, some soil borings completed as we move beyond 60%. That may provide some additional answers about the soil strata, but at this time, we don't have that information.
Oh, okay.
And in regards to your question about having some documentation, this entire presentation will be available, I believe, on the Blueprint website. And
Okay.
there's an interactive website. I'm sure I'm stealing someone's thunder, but there's an interactive website that you can zoom in directly on your property and see exactly what type of rain garden is planned adjacent to your property or down the street or in the entire neighborhood. So you'll have that all on your phone.
All right, lovely.
All right, thank you.
All right, let's go to the next slide.
Hey, Marie, before we go to the next slide,
Sure.
there was a pervious paver street in this section that I wanted to chat about real quickly.
Sure.
So we had not gotten to that. So as Dan mentioned earlier, we have two permeable paver streets or pervious paver streets. They're both shown on this slide, but the one that we'll talk about at this point is just west of Terrace Avenue. That's a 400-foot length of pervious pavers on Richardson between Whitehead and Mound. We chose this location because it's relatively short, has relatively few trees and alleys behind, and the Division of Water is already going to reconstruct a water line through here. So we thought we would work together with them to minimize overall resident impact by combining our project with their project. We do have a little bit of sporadic parking loss, but we did the parking study for all the streets in this area that had that and found no significant impact to the overall parking usage.
Okay. Let's go on to the next one, Joe.
Be glad to. So lastly, this is a closer look at the east side of the project area, generally bounded by Eureka Avenue on the west, Sullivan Avenue on the north, Whitethorn Avenue on the east, and Mound Street on the south. We have the most green infrastructure in the project located in this area, simply because one, it's the largest of the three areas, and two, the drainage does go from west to east. So it does tend to consolidate in this area. We have 36 rain gardens. That includes the one bump out that we've already discussed on Amherst, 10 of the sloped rain gardens on some of our uncurbed streets, 8 of the two-walled rain gardens with step outs, 17 two-walled rain gardens, and 3 of the two-walled rain gardens with step outs are actually in locations where we have a lot of right-of-way behind the sidewalk. One of those, as we already discussed, was 21, I believe it's 2188 West Mound. We have 2 others like that, and in those cases, we're placing the rain garden behind the right-of-way, behind the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the right-of-way line. As you can see here, all 7 of our larger regional rain gardens are located in this area, mostly because most of the land bank properties are on the east side of the project area. You can see them there in the light blue. Several of these regional rain gardens are on intersection corners, but most or all are located in some fashion adjacent to an existing residential lot. And finally, we have the second of our 2 pervious paver streets in this location. This is a 600-foot length of Eureka between Springmont and Safford Avenue. Once again, relatively short, few trees with alleys behind, and we will have a water line replacement that's a part of this pervious paver installation. So some minor parking loss in this area. Once again, we did the parking study and found no significant impact. And we will have 2 small trees that will be lost with rain gardens on Wayne Avenue. There's possible there will be some other trees lost as we move forward. But Mayor Ginther has recently adopted a tree replacement policy for all construction projects in the city. Trees will be replaced based on that policy, and we'll be addressing that in the next phase of the design.
And we're going to get to that policy in just a second. Before we move on to that, anybody who's living in this area or the last map, do you have any questions? I see a hand raised. And if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and share your question.
Yeah. I was thinking about that Safford thing. Safford is wide enough that if you do a little street work, you could bisect that street and put a canal in. And now, don't laugh. I think if we're having so much problems with drainage, a canal, like something like what Los Angeles has, but not nearly as big, but it would go right down the center of the street, and you would have bridges like at each intersection, like Whitethorn at Wheatland. Let's see here. Columbian. I don't know where that water would drain off to. I think it would go into the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation's property there. I was thinking maybe perhaps there was some way that it could connect up with an underground sewer system. I think that would take care of that right there with the canal right there at Safford. And whenever you have major rain, that major rain would be drained off and it would go down the hill. Additionally,
go ahead.
Yeah. Additionally, I was also thinking about when it comes to a storm sewer thing, you could, the city can actually install some removable grading that can be pulled up, for trash and stuff like that, and be dumped into a trash truck, or they can be cleaned out. That would assure the purity of the water, at least most of it. But,
so Eric, I love your brainstorming. I want to get to our next commenter because I do need to wrap things up at 7:30. So right. I think it's Rochelle that has her hand raised.
Yeah, I just had a question. Somebody said we could go on to a link and put in our address to see what rain garden Can you tell me how to get to that again?
Yes, we're going to put the website up in just a minute. And then Anthony or Mitch, if you could add the link as well.
Oh,
Um,
that's great. Thank you.
There you go. All right. Okay, so let's go to our next couple slides. I want, Joe, why don't you talk a little bit more about these additional impacts?
Okay, thank you, Marie. So these are other impacts in the project area. Most of these items we have already talked about. There will be sidewalks replaced adjacent to most of our rain gardens and on the permeable paver streets. There will be water lines replaced in some locations throughout the project and definitely on the pervious paver streets. New storm sewers will be installed. All of these things we've talked about, and they will be a part of the project. We do have, speaking of the trees that will be removed and replaced, this table to the right gives you some information about how they will be replaced. For example, if an 18 to 24 inch tree is taken down, 3 trees will be planted in its place. The replacement trees will be planted somewhere in close proximity to the tree that's been removed. The type of tree will be based on the conditions in the replacement area, its proximity to the road, sun, things like that. We have an expert on our team, Chad Kettlewell, who will be doing that part of the design, and we'll be addressing that in the next phase of the project.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. I'm going to skip this one here, Nick, and go to our next steps and talk about what's next. So what's next is, first of all, several of you gave your addresses, and there will be some follow-up with you directly about some of the questions you had. And then we are going to review and digest this feedback and your thoughts. And there's also some additional technical analysis that needs to be done. We also reach out to other stakeholders. Remember, you heard Dan, I believe, talk about rec and parks, and somebody talked about public service. There's just all sorts of coordination that has to occur, and those experts weigh in as well. So then the design will be updated and further refined as appropriate. We will alert you when we're at 90% design and pre-construction. The team will come out again and mark the updated green infrastructure location, so you know if it's something in front of your house. And then residents who have a basement with no sump pump are eligible for an inspection for a free sump pump. And so Nick, if you go to the next slide, it gives you information on where to learn more and sign up. Now, I do believe Tiffany, did you mention earlier to me that you're in the process of ordering some, or they may not be quite ready to go out on the street yet, but coming soon? Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, so we will be opening up the sump pump contracts later this year for this area. So we normally don't release a contract till about the 60% design marker of the timeline. But yes, so the contracts will hopefully go out later this year, and then they'll start calling down the list. So wherever you are on the list, they should probably quickly get to you. I don't think this list is super long, but they do start at the top. So if you are interested, if you do not have a sump pump and you are in a single family or duplex, give us a call or go to blueprintneighborhoods.com to sign up.
Thanks, Tiffany. And I see Kiefer Schmidt has a question.
You actually answered it. I was about to say, if we already had a sub pump, did we need one? Because Basement Authority did ours. We have a submerged sub pump with a backup battery as well.
Oh, well done. Well done.
So, yep, you already answered that then.
Great. Okay, so this is one last chance. We're going to put up another. Oh, Eric, I'll get to you in just a second. We're going to put up a little bit more information. And actually, Nick, if you would go to our outreach team. So you may have seen these folks out on the streets, and there are folks listening in. Of course, you have met Tiffany tonight. You've met me, Nick. You've heard this anonymous guy when we've said, hey, Nick, forward the slides. There's Anthony, there's Elias. So a lot of us who are eager to hear your emails and hear your phone calls and emails and answer your questions. So I want to assure you on that. So Eric, you've got about 60 seconds. What's on your mind yet? I think I saw your hand again, but maybe I didn't.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
I just wanted to add, I was going, blah, 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 is that fast enough? You know, I was just thinking about that canal too. You know, that could be routed down through the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and sent through the park down to the foot of the hill where there, and you know, where the baseball park is. Of that canal could actually be routed to the dry run.
Well, I know you've given everybody a lot of great ideas to think about. So we will digest some of that input, and I know they're going to talk with you directly. I so much want to thank you all for participating tonight and being just such good sports. And as you can see, we have contact information. And Nick, if you can go back one slide, it has our phone number, it has the email address. So if you feel like you didn't get your question answered or you want more details on your specific property, please email us and we will get back to you. And Kiefer, I think we got your question. Your hand's still up. But Kiefer, did you have something else you wanted to say? I kind of think Kiefer's covered.
Oh,
But-
no, sorry. I must have accidentally hit it. That's my fault. Sorry.
No problem. No harm, no foul. And Elena, do you want to say any closing remarks just to reinforce how grateful we are to have everybody participate?
Yeah, thank you, Marie. And again, thank you all for taking the time today. It's just been wonderful to hear your thoughts and your ideas. And this is exactly, you know, what we need to move into the next stage of our design. So we're very grateful for the engagement and the interaction. And as Marie and others have mentioned, we are always here. If a new idea comes to you after the meeting, please get in contact with us at our Blueprint email address or our telephone number, and we'd be happy to engage with you and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we are coming on 7:30, so I'm going to respect your time and I'm going to adjourn. Thank you so much, Elena. Thank you, team, and thank you, residents of Hilltop, for participating tonight.